I'm Nina Langford, 27 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed family meant unconditional love and equal treatment. Then my father's phone call from our Vermont lakehouse changed everything. His voice was steady, almost businesslike, when he told me he'd rewritten his will and I wasn't in it anymore. The silence that followed felt like drowning in still water. Dad's exact words still echo in my mind. Your brother Liam will inherit everything. He's proven himself responsible, Nina. You've chosen your path. What he didn't know was that I had been sending him money for his medical bills for the past 2 years, using savings from my freelance illustration work. Money I never mentioned, because I thought love didn't need acknowledgment. But here's what makes this story even more devastating. I discovered something in Mom's old journals that changed everything I thought I knew about our family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train from New York to Vermont had always been my favorite journey. Rolling hills, covered bridges, the promise of home, or what used to feel like home. Now, staring out the window at the familiar landscape, I felt like an intruder returning to a place that had already erased me. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen, my best friend and sometimes roommate in Brooklyn. You sure about this? You could just burn the bridge from a distance like a normal person. I almost smiled. Carmen Ellis had grown up in foster care, moving between families who saw her as temporary. She understood rejection in ways most people couldn't. But she also understood something I was still learning. That sometimes you have to face the people who hurt you, not to forgive them, but to free yourself. The Langford family lakehouse sat on the shore of Lake Champlain, a sprawling Victorian my great-grandfather built in 1923. Growing up, I'd loved its wraparound porch, the widow's walk on the 3rd floor where Mom used to paint watercolors of the sunset, and the boathouse where Liam and I spent summers reading adventure novels and sharing secrets. Now it looked smaller somehow, as if my absence had diminished it. Or maybe I'd just grown too large for the space Dad had allotted me. I parked my rental car, a practical Honda that screamed struggling artist, next to Dad's pristine Volvo. The same car he'd driven for 15 years, maintained with the meticulous care he applied to everything except his relationship with his daughter. The front door opened before I could knock. Thomas Langford stood there in his usual uniform, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. At 63, he looked every inch the retired history professor, distinguished, distant, and completely uncomfortable with emotional confrontation. Nina. His voice carried the same measured tone he'd used during that devastating phone call. You made good time. Traffic was light. I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of lemon oil. And old books. Nothing had changed. The same family photos lined the hallway. Graduation pictures, vacation snapshots, formal portraits. A visual timeline of the Langford family legacy. I noticed, not for the first time, how few of them included me after age 16. Your room is ready, Dad said, leading me toward the kitchen. I put fresh sheets on the bed. My room, as if I still belonged here, as if he hadn't just legally declared otherwise. The kitchen was Mom's domain, even 11 years after her death. Her cast-iron pan still hung from hooks above the stove. Her collection of vintage recipe cards sat in their wooden box on the counter. Her coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, still occupied its place in the cabinet. Dad poured himself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning. He didn't offer me any. How long? Are you planning to stay? He asked. As long as it takes. For what? I set my bag down and looked at him directly. To understand why you hate me. The words hung between us like smoke. Dad's jaw tightened, and he turned toward the window that overlooked the lake. In the distance, I could see the small island where Mom used to take Liam and me for picnics. She'd pack sandwiches and lemonade, and we'd spend hours collecting smooth stones and building fairy houses from twigs and moss. I don't hate you, Nina. Then explain the will. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grievances. You left. You made it clear that this family, this place, meant nothing to you. I was 19, Dad. I needed to find my own way. You needed to run away. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had been running from his disapproval, from the suffocating expectation that I should want the same conventional life that satisfied him and Liam, from the constant reminder that I could never measure up to his idea of a proper daughter. Maybe I was running, I admitted, but you never gave me a reason to stay. Dad turned back to me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or recognition. But it disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. Your brother calls every week, he said. He visits every month. He helped me set up the historical preservation grant for the town library. He's building a life here, contributing to the community. And I'm what? A disappointment because I chose art over respectability? You chose uncertainty over stability. You chose a lifestyle that has no future, no security. I chose authenticity over approval. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, separated by more than granite countertops. This was the same argument we'd been having for 8 years, refined and sharpened by time and hurt feelings. My phone buzzed, a text from Liam. Dad said you were coming up. Want to grab dinner tonight? I know a place. I showed Dad the message. Does he know? About the will? No. I wanted to tell you first. How generous of you. Dad flinched at my sarcasm. Nina, this isn't about punishment. It's about practicality. Liam will take care of this place, preserve it for future generations. He understands responsibility. And I don't? Do you? The question hit harder than I expected. Did I understand? Responsibility? I'd been paying my own bills since college, supporting myself as a freelance illustrator in one of the most expensive cities in the world. I'd been sending Dad money for his medical expenses without being asked. I'd maintained my independence without asking for help from anyone. But in his eyes, responsibility meant conformity. It meant choosing the safe path, the expected path, the path that led back to this house and this life. I think we define responsibility differently, I said finally. Yes, we do. I picked up my bag and headed toward the stairs. I'm going to unpack, then I'm having dinner with Liam. Nina, I turned back. I hope you can understand my decision. In time. I hope you can understand mine too, Dad, because I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out. His expression hardened. There's nothing to figure out. The will is final. The will might be final, but this conversation isn't. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, each step feeling like a small act of rebellion. The room was exactly as I'd left it 8 years ago. Twin bed with the quilt Mom made, desk by the window where I used to draw, bookshelf filled with young adult novels and art books. But on the desk, I noticed something new. A manila folder with my name written on it in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside were financial records, medical bills from Dad's cardiologist, statements from his insurance, company receipts for prescriptions, and at the bottom, a stack of canceled checks, every money order I'd sent him over the past 2 years, endorsed and deposited. He'd kept them all, every single one. A note was clipped to the last check, written in his familiar script. Nina, I never asked for this, but I want you to know it didn't go unnoticed. Dad. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, holding the evidence of his quiet acknowledgment. He knew. He'd always known. So why hadn't it mattered? My phone rang. Liam. Hey, stranger. His voice was warm, familiar. Dad said you're in town. Everything okay? Everything was definitely not okay, but I wasn't ready to explain why. Not yet. Just needed to come home for a while, I said. Well, I'm glad you're here. Want to meet at Murphy's Tavern? 7 o'clock? Murphy's was where we used to go for birthday. Dinners, family celebrations, the rare occasions when Dad felt social enough for a public meal. It felt like neutral territory. I'll be there. After I hung up, I opened the window that faced the lake. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the water, and I could hear the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. This view had been my constant companion growing up, through homework sessions and teenage heartbreak, through the long nights after Mom died when sleep felt impossible. I pulled out my sketchbook and started drawing, letting my hands work while my mind processed. The pencil moved across the page, creating the outline of the house, the dock, the island in the distance. But as I drew, I found myself adding details that weren't there. Shadows that looked like figures, windows that seemed to hold watching eyes, a sense of loneliness that permeated even the landscape. This was how I'd always processed difficult emotions, through art, through the act of creation that Dad dismissed as impractical. But looking at the sketch now, I realized it wasn't just a drawing of the lake house. It was a portrait of a family fractured, a home where love had conditions and acceptance came with fine print. I checked the time. 6:30. Time to face my brother and decide how much of the truth I was ready to share. But first, I had one more thing to do. I walked to Mom's old art room on the 3rd floor, the space that had been converted to storage after her death. Dad had packed away her paintings, her easel, her tubes of watercolor paint that had probably dried to dust by now. The room smelled like memories, turpentine and hope, creativity and dreams deferred. Mom's paintings were stacked against the walls, covered with sheets like ghosts waiting to be remembered. I pulled away one of the sheets and found myself staring at a self-portrait Mom had painted the year before she died. She looked younger than I remembered, her eyes bright with possibility. At the bottom of the canvas, she'd written a quote in her flowing script. "A woman who has found her voice is a woman who has found her power." I'd never seen this painting before. Dad must have hidden it away with the others, sealing off this part of Mom's legacy, just like he was trying to seal off mine. But unlike Dad's will, this wasn't something he could control. Mom's voice was still here, waiting to be heard. And maybe, if I listened closely enough, I could find my own voice too, the one that had been silenced by years of trying to earn approval that would never come. I covered the painting back up, but not before taking a photo with my phone. Some things were too important to leave buried. Murphy's Tavern was exactly as I remembered. Dim lighting, red vinyl booths, the smell of fried food and old wood. Liam was already waiting when I arrived, looking like the perfect older brother in his wool sweater and jeans. At 30, he had Dad's angular features but Mom's kind eyes, and the easy confidence that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. He stood when he saw me, pulling me into a hug that felt genuine and complicated at the same time. "You look good," he said. "City life agrees with you." "Thanks. You look like you haven't aged a day since college." We settled into our booth, and the waitress, who had apparently been working here since the dawn of time, took our drink orders. Beer for Liam, wine for me, the familiar ritual of siblings reconnecting after too much time apart. "So," Liam said, raising his glass, "what brings you back to our little corner of paradise?" I studied his face, looking for any sign that he knew, about the will, about Dad's decision to erase me from the family legacy. But he just looked happy to see me, uncomplicated in his affection. "Just needed a break from the city," I said. "Freelance work has been intense." "I still can't believe. You make a living drawing pictures." He meant it as a compliment, but it stung anyway. Even Liam, who loved me unconditionally, couldn't quite take my career seriously. Illustration, I corrected. And it's more than just drawing pictures. Sorry. You know what I mean. It's just so different from anything the rest of us ever imagined. Doing. The rest of us. As if I'd never really been part of the family equation. We ordered food, fish and chips for him, a salad for me, and fell into the easy conversation of siblings catching up. He told me about his job at the environmental consulting firm, his girlfriend Sarah, who worked at the elementary school, his plans to propose next Christmas. I told him about my latest client, a children's book publisher who was finally starting to pay decent rates, my ongoing battle with my landlord over the broken heating in my studio apartment. Normal stuff, brother and sister stuff. The kind of conversation that made me remember why I'd missed him so much. But underneath it all, I could feel the weight of what I wasn't saying. The will, Dad's betrayal, the growing certainty that I was about to blow up our family's carefully maintained equilibrium. "How's Dad doing?" I asked finally. With his heart stuff, I mean. Liam's expression grew serious. Better, actually. The medication is helping, and he's been more active lately. Working on that historical preservation project has given him a sense of purpose. He seems the same to me. Distant. He's always been that way. You know, Dad. Emotions make him uncomfortable. They shouldn't have to. Liam looked at me more closely. Is everything okay between you two? You seem, I don't know, tense. This was it. The moment where I could tell him everything, where I could drag him into the mess that Dad had created. But looking at his concerned face, his genuine worry for both me and Dad, I couldn't do it. Not yet. We just have different ideas about a lot of things, I said. You always have. But your family, that has to count for something. Family. The word sat heavy between us, loaded with all the expectations and disappointments that came with it. Does it? I asked. Count for something, I mean. Liam reached across the table and took my hand. Of course it does. Nina, you're my sister. You're Dad's daughter. Nothing changes that. If only he knew how wrong he was. We finished dinner with lighter conversation. Childhood memories, stories, about Mom. Speculation about whether the Red Sox would ever win another World Series. But as we prepared to leave, Liam grew serious again. I'm glad you're home, he said. I know Dad can be difficult, but he loves you. Sometimes I think he just doesn't know how to show it. Maybe, I said. But I was thinking about the manila folder upstairs, about the will that proved love, in Dad's world, came with conditions and fine print. We hugged goodbye in the parking lot, and I watched Liam drive away in his sensible sedan. Then I sat in my rental car for a long time, looking up at the stars that were so much brighter here than in New York. Tomorrow, I would have to decide how much truth this family could handle. Tonight, I just wanted to hold on to the illusion that we were still the Langfords I remembered. Complicated but connected, flawed but fundamentally loving. But deep down, I knew that version of our family had died along with Mom. What remained was a beautiful house on a pretty lake, inhabited by people who shared DNA, but had forgotten how to share their hearts. I drove back to the lakehouse slowly, taking the long way past the places that had shaped my childhood. The elementary school where Mom volunteered as an art teacher, the library where Dad had spent countless hours researching local history, the small beach where our family had its last perfect day together, 2 months before Mom's stroke changed everything. These places held the ghost of who we used to be. The question now was whether we could ever find our way back to each other, or if some distances were too great to bridge. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw a light on in Dad's study. He was probably reading, maybe grading papers from the history, classes he still taught part-time at the community college. For a moment, I considered knocking on his door, trying to continue our earlier conversation. But then I remembered his words. The will is final. Some conversations, I was learning, required more than good intentions. They required leverage, and tomorrow, I was going to start looking for mine. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I woke up to the sound of Dad making coffee downstairs, the familiar ritual of ceramic mugs clinking against granite countertops. For a moment, lying in my childhood bed with morning light filtering through curtains Mom had sewn 20 years ago, I could almost pretend nothing had changed. Then I remembered why I was here. By the time I made it to the kitchen, Dad had already left for his morning walk around the lake, a routine he'd started after his heart attack last year. A note on the counter read, "Took your car to get the oil changed. Back by noon." Dad. I stared at the note, feeling the familiar mix of gratitude and frustration that characterized our relationship. He'd noticed my car needed maintenance and taken care of it without being asked, but he'd also made the decision without consulting me, the same way he'd made every major decision that affected my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. Survival update? Do I need to drive up there with a getaway car and a fake mustache? I typed back, still breathing. Dad got my oil. Changed this morning. That's either really sweet or really controlling. Both. Definitely both. I poured myself coffee and wandered into Dad's study, drawn by the same curiosity that had gotten me in trouble as a child. The room was exactly as I remembered. Floor to ceiling. Bookshelves, antique desk, walls covered with historical maps and framed photographs of local landmarks. But there was something new. A filing cabinet I'd never seen before, with a small brass nameplate that read, Estate Planning. My pulse quickened. The top drawer was locked, but I knew Dad's habits. He'd always been paranoid about losing keys, so he kept spares in the same places throughout the house. The study key was tucked behind a volume of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, a hiding place so predictable it would have made Mom laugh. My hands shook as I opened the drawer. Inside were neat manila folders labeled with dates going back 5 years. I pulled out the most recent one, marked Will Revision Current. The document was exactly what I expected, and somehow worse than I'd imagined. Everything. The house, the investments, the small trust fund Mom had inherited from her parents, went to Liam. But it wasn't just the financial inheritance that cut deep. It was the personal items. Mom's jewelry, her art supplies, even the family photographs. I was being erased from the Langford legacy, as if I'd never existed. But as I flipped through the pages, I found something that stopped me cold. A letter, handwritten on Dad's personal stationery, paperclipped to the back of the will. It was addressed to me. Nina, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're going through my papers. I want you to understand my decision, even if you can't accept it. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Your mother and I always knew you were different. Creative, independent, unwilling to accept the conventional path. For years I saw this as a failing, an inability to appreciate the stability and security that previous generations of Langfords had worked to build. But after her death, I began to understand something she tried to tell me many times. You don't need our approval to succeed. You don't need this house or this money to build a meaningful life. You've already proven that. Liam, on the other hand, has never had to test his independence. He's followed the safe path, the expected path. But I wonder sometimes if he's done so out of genuine desire or simple fear of disappointment. This inheritance isn't a punishment for you, Nina. It's recognition that you're strong enough to create your own legacy. It's my clumsy way of setting you free from the expectations that have always constrained our relationship. I hope someday you'll understand that love doesn't always look like fairness. Sometimes it looks like trust in someone's ability to forge their own way. Your father, Thomas Langford. I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through: confusion, anger, and something that might have been understanding. This wasn't the simple rejection I'd assumed. It was something more complex. Patronizing, maybe, but not malicious. Dad thought he was protecting me from a legacy that would tie me to this place and these expectations. He thought he was giving me permission to be myself by taking away any financial incentive to conform. But what he didn't understand was that the money had never been the point. The point was acknowledgment. The point was being seen as an equal member of this family, worthy of the same consideration given to my brother. I was so absorbed in the letter that I didn't hear the front door open. Nina? You home? Liam's voice carried from the entryway. I quickly shoved the will and letter back into the folder, locked the filing cabinet, and replaced the key. By the time Liam found me in the study, I was sitting casually in Dad's reading chair, pretending to browse a book about Vermont history. Hey, he said. Dad told me he took your car. Everything okay? Fine. Just needed an oil change. Liam looked around the study, his expression thoughtful. You know, I don't think I've been in here since high school. Dad always treated it like his private sanctuary. Some things never change. Speaking of change, Liam said, settling into the chair across from me, I wanted to talk to you about something. Sarah and I have been looking at houses, and we found this perfect place about 10 minutes from here. 3 bedrooms, great yard for kids someday, close enough that I can help Dad with maintenance on this place. I felt a chill of premonition. Sounds nice. The thing is, it's a little more expensive than we planned. I was wondering if Dad might be willing to help with the down payment. I mean, this house is going to need someone to take care of it eventually, and if Sarah and I are nearby. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Liam was already thinking about inheriting the lakehouse, already planning his future, around the assumption that he would be Dad's sole heir. Have you talked to Dad about it? I asked. Not yet. I wanted to run it by you first, actually. I know you and Dad have your differences, but family decisions should involve the whole family, right? The irony was almost funny. Liam, who would inherit everything, was consulting me about a decision that would ultimately be funded by my exclusion from that inheritance. What do you think Dad will say? Honestly? I think he'll be thrilled. He's always worried about what would happen to this place after he's gone. Having me nearby would solve that problem. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Liam had no idea that Dad's worries about the house's future had already been resolved by a legal document that made my brother the sole guardian of our family's legacy. You should talk to him, I said finally. I will. But Nina, there's something else. Sarah and I have been talking, and we'd love for you to be more involved. I know you and Dad don't always see eye to eye, but this could be a fresh start, for all of us. The earnestness in his voice broke my heart. Liam genuinely wanted me to be part of his future, part of the family's future. He had no idea that Dad had already decided I didn't belong. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. After Liam left, I sat in Dad's study for a long time, staring at the locked filing cabinet that held the blueprint for my family's future, a future that didn't include me. The house felt different now, loaded, with secrets and unspoken decisions. Every family photograph on the walls seemed to mock me. Every piece of furniture carried the weight of a legacy I'd been deemed unworthy to inherit. But Dad's letter had also revealed something important. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about competing visions of love, responsibility, and family obligation. Dad thought he was setting me free. I thought he was cutting me loose. The question was whether there was any middle ground between his patronizing liberation and my need for genuine acceptance. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. Nina Langford? Yes. This is Grace Turner from Turner & Associates. I'm your father's attorney. I understand you're visiting, and I was wondering if we could arrange a meeting. There are some matters regarding your father's estate that I'd like to discuss. My pulse quickened. What kind of matters? I'd prefer to discuss them in person, if you don't mind. Would tomorrow morning work? Say 10 o'clock? I agreed to the meeting, though I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace Turner knew more about my situation than she was letting on. Lawyers didn't typically reach out to family members who'd been excluded from wills, unless there was a complication. When Dad returned from his errands, he found me sitting on the front porch, sketching the lake view that had been my constant companion growing up. Your car's running better, he said, handing me the keys. They changed the air filter, too. It was pretty dirty. Thank you. He sat down in the chair next to mine, something he rarely did. For a few minutes we sat in comfortable silence, watching a family of ducks paddle near the dock. You were always drawing that view, he said finally. Even as a little girl. You'd sit out here for hours with your sketch pad. It changes constantly. Different light, different seasons. I never got tired of it. Your mother used to say the same thing. She painted it dozens of times, but never the same way twice. This was the most he'd mentioned Mom in years. Usually her memory was too painful for him to discuss. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do. You ever regret the way things turned out? Between us, I mean. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. I regret a lot of things, Nina, but not the person you've become. Even though I disappointed you, you didn't disappoint me. You challenged me. There's a difference. Then why? I stopped myself before mentioning the will. This conversation felt too fragile for that kind of confrontation. Why what? Why do we always seem to be talking past each other? Dad turned to look at me directly. Because we're more alike than either of us wants to admit. We're both stubborn, both convinced we're right, both too proud to admit when we're wrong. I'm not sure that's entirely fair. See? There's that stubbornness. Despite everything, I almost smiled. You're one to talk. Touché. We lapsed back into silence, but it felt different now. Less tense, more nostalgic. For a moment, I could almost believe we might find our way back to each other. Then Dad stood up, brushing off his pants. I should start dinner. Liam's coming. By later, he said he wanted to talk about something. The mention of Liam brought reality crashing back. My brother was coming to discuss his house plans, his future, his inheritance. Dad would probably agree to help with the down payment, securing Liam's position as the family's golden child, while further cementing my status as the outsider. I think I'll skip dinner tonight, I said. I have some calls to make. Dad nodded, but I caught a flicker of disappointment across his face. Another time then? As he headed inside, I pulled out my phone and called Carmen. How's the family reconciliation going? She asked without preamble. It's complicated. Really, really complicated. Want me to come up? I can be there by tomorrow night. The offer was tempting. Carmen had a way of cutting through emotional confusion with practical clarity, but this was something I needed to handle myself. Not yet. But I might need you soon. What aren't you telling me? I looked back at the house, where Dad was probably setting the table for two, where Liam would soon arrive to discuss his bright future, where family decisions were being made without consulting the family member who'd been erased from the family's legal definition. I'm starting to think this isn't just about money, I said. It's about who gets to define what family means. And, what's your definition? I thought about Dad's letter, about his patronizing attempt to set me free, about Liam's genuine desire to include me in a future that had already been decided without me. I'm still figuring that out, I said. But I know it's not this. After I hung up, I walked down to the dock and sat with my feet dangling in the cool water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the soft pastels Mom used to capture in her watercolors. Tomorrow, I would meet with Grace Turner and learn what other secrets the Langford family legal empire contained. Tonight, I would sit here and remember what it felt like to belong somewhere, even if that belonging had always been conditional. The ducks had settled in for the evening, tucked among the reeds near the shore. A loon called from somewhere across the lake, its haunting cry echoing off the water. These sounds, this view, this sense of place, they were as much mine as anyone's, regardless of what any legal document said. But as I watched Liam's headlights turn into the driveway, I realized that claiming my place in this family would require more than nostalgia and righteous indignation. It would require strategy, courage, and a willingness to risk the few fragile connections I had left. The meeting with Grace Turner tomorrow would be the first step. After that, I would have to decide whether fighting for recognition was worth the potential cost of losing my family entirely. But sitting there on the dock where Mom used to teach me to fish, where Liam and I had spent countless summer afternoons, where I'd first learned to see beauty as something worth preserving, I knew I couldn't walk away without trying. This place, these people, this complicated legacy, they were part of me, whether Dad's will acknowledged it or not. And I was part of them, regardless of what any legal document said. The question was whether we could all learn to live with that truth. Grace Turner's law office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building on Main Street, the kind of place that had probably housed lawyers since Vermont achieved statehood. The waiting room smelled like leather and old wood, with family photographs covering every surface, generations of Turner attorneys serving the community, maintaining the careful balance between progress and tradition that defined small-town life. Grace herself was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the elderly, conservative lawyer I'd imagined, she was maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that missed nothing. She wore a navy blazer over jeans, striking the perfect balance between professional authority and approachable warmth. "Nina," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I've been hoping we'd have a chance to talk." Her office was spacious but cluttered, with legal files stacked on every surface and a coffee maker that looked like it had been running continuously since the Carter administration. Family photos shared space with law degrees and civic awards. Grace Turner was clearly someone who'd built her life around this community. "Your father speaks of you often," she said, settling behind her desk. "I'm sure he does." Grace smiled at my dry tone. "Actually, he does. And not in the way you might think. Thomas is complicated when it comes to expressing affection. That's one word for it. He's also one of my oldest friends. We went to high school together, believe it or not. I've watched him struggle with how to be a father to a daughter who refused to fit into his carefully constructed world." I bristled at the implication. "I never refused anything. I just chose a different path." "Exactly." And that terrified him. Grace poured herself coffee from the ancient machine and offered me a cup. I accepted, grateful for something to do with my hands. "I assume this is about the will," I said. "Among other things. Nina, I need you to know that I advised your father against the current arrangement, multiple times. But you drew it up anyway. It's my job to execute my clients' wishes, not to make their family decisions for them. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with those decisions." Grace opened a file on her desk, thick, well-organized, clearly the product of years of meticulous documentation. "Your father has been revising his estate plan regularly for the past 5 years. This is the 7th version I've prepared. 7th? The first 4 included you as an equal beneficiary with Liam. The 5th reduced your inheritance to 30%. The 6th cut it to 20%. This latest version..." She shrugged. "Well, you know what it says." I stared at her, trying to process this information. What changed his mind? That's what I was hoping you could tell me. The revisions always came after you'd been home for visits, or after conversations with Liam, or sometimes just out of the blue. Your father would call me up, schedule an appointment, and ask for another revision. Grace pulled out a calendar, marked with dates and notes in her careful handwriting. Version 5 happened 2 weeks after you didn't come home for Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. Version 6 was right after Liam told him about his engagement plans. This latest version was completed the day after you sent that last money order for his medical bills. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. He changed it because I sent money? I think he changed it because he realized how guilty he felt about accepting money from the daughter he was planning to disinherit. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Dad had punished me for loving him, for caring enough to help when he needed it. There's something else, Grace continued. Your father included a provision in the will that you should probably know about. She flipped to a page near the back of the document. If you choose to contest the will, Liam's inheritance is reduced by 50%. The money doesn't go to you, it goes to charity. Specifically, to an art education fund in your mother's name. I stared at the legal language, trying to understand the implications. He's trying to prevent me from fighting this. Or he's trying to ensure that any fight you choose is motivated by principle rather than money. What's the difference? A lot, actually. If you contest the will for financial reasons, you'll hurt Liam and accomplish nothing for yourself. But if you contest it to make a point about family and recognition... Grace leaned back in her chair. Well, that's a conversation worth having. I thought about Liam's plans for the house near the lake, his need for help with the down payment, his genuine desire to include me in the family's future. Fighting the will wouldn't just hurt him financially, it would destroy his dreams and probably our relationship. Nina, can I ask you something personal? I nodded. What do you actually want from your father? The question hit harder than I expected. What did I want? The money would be nice, sure, but I'd been supporting myself just fine without it. The house held memories, but I wasn't planning to move back to Vermont. The family heirlooms had sentimental value, but not enough to justify a legal battle. I want him to see me, I said finally. Really see me. Not as a disappointment or a project or someone who needs to be set free from family expectations. Just me. And do you think a legal fight will accomplish that? I don't know. Maybe. It would force him to acknowledge that I exist, that I matter. Grace was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years reading people's motivations. There might be another way, she said. What do you mean? A lot, actually. If you contest the will for financial reasons, you'll hurt Liam and accomplish nothing for yourself. But if you contest it to make a point about family and recognition... Grace leaned back in her chair. Well, that's a conversation worth having. I thought about Liam's plans for the house near the lake, his need for help with the down payment, his genuine desire to include me in the family's future. Fighting the will wouldn't just hurt him financially, it would destroy his dreams and probably our relationship. Nina, can I ask you something personal? I nodded. What do you actually want from your father? The question hit harder than I expected. What did I want? The money would be nice, sure, but I'd been supporting myself just fine without it. The house held memories, but I wasn't planning to move back to Vermont. The family heirlooms had sentimental value, but not enough to justify a legal battle. I want him to see me, I said finally. Really see me. Not as a disappointment or a project or someone who needs to be set free from family expectations. Just me. And do you think a legal fight will accomplish that? I don't know. Maybe. It would force him to acknowledge that I exist, that I matter. Grace was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years reading people's motivations. There might be another way, she said. What do you mean? Your father isn't the only one with legal options. You could contest the will, yes, but you could also challenge his capacity to make these decisions. The multiple revisions, the emotional volatility behind each change, they paint a picture of someone who might not be thinking clearly. The suggestion sent a chill through me. You want me to declare my father mentally incompetent? I want you to consider all your options. Thomas has been under significant stress since his heart attack. The medications he's taking can affect judgment and emotional regulation. A competency hearing would at least force a conversation about whether these decisions represent his true wishes or the product of anxiety and fear. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked Main Street. Below, I could see the coffee shop, where Mom used to take me for hot chocolate after my piano lessons, the bookstore where Dad had bought me my first set of professional art supplies, the park where our family had attended summer concerts before everything fell apart. I can't do that to him, I said, even if it's the only way to get him to listen, especially then. If I have to destroy his dignity to earn his respect, then his respect isn't worth having. Grace nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. It tells me you're fighting for the right reasons. So what do I do? You could try talking to him. Really talking. Not just about the will, but about everything that's been left unsaid between you. We tried that yesterday. It didn't go well. Then maybe you need a different approach. Your father is a historian, Nina. He thinks in terms of legacy, of how current actions will be remembered by future generations. Maybe the conversation isn't about what he owes you now, but about what kind of story he wants to leave behind. I returned to my chair, turning over Grace's words. Dad had always been obsessed with legacy, family history, community contributions, the lasting impact of individual choices. Maybe that was the key to reaching him. There's one more thing, Grace said. Something your father doesn't know I'm going to tell you. She pulled out another file, this one much thinner. Your mother had her own will. A very simple document that she never updated after you were born. Everything she owned, her personal property, her small investment account, her mother's jewelry, was left to you and Liam equally. But Dad inherited everything when she died. Legally, yes. Spouses typically inherit from each other automatically. But morally, your mother's intentions were clear. She wanted both her children to have something of hers. Grace opened the file and showed me a handwritten note attached to the will. She wrote this the week before she died. It's not legally binding, but it might be morally persuasive. The note was in Mom's familiar script. For my children, Nina and Liam should share equally in my personal belongings. My art supplies go to Nina, who has inherited my love of creating beauty. My jewelry goes to both, to remember that love takes many forms. Most importantly, they should know that they are equally precious to me, equally deserving of whatever legacy I can leave. Martha Langford. I read the note 3 times, my vision blurring with tears. Mom had seen us as equals. She had wanted us treated as equals. Dad's will wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of Mom's wishes. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because your father has forgotten what your mother wanted. Maybe it's time to remind him. I left Grace's office with copies of both Will's and Mom's note, plus a business card that Grace pressed into my hand, just in case. The morning sun felt too bright after the dim interior of the law office, and I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to process everything I'd learned. 7 versions of the will. Each revision removing me further from Dad's conception of the family's future, but also Mom's clear intention that Liam and I should be treated equally, that we were both equally precious to her. The contradiction felt like standing between 2 competing gravitational forces, pulled in directions that would tear me apart if I wasn't careful. My phone buzzed. A text from Liam. Had a great talk with Dad last night. He's going to help with the house. Want to celebrate? Lunch at Murphy's? I stared at the message, feeling the weight of everything Liam didn't know. His excitement was genuine. His gratitude, real. He had no idea that Dad's generosity toward him was funded by my exclusion from the family legacy. Instead of responding immediately, I drove to the cemetery where Mom was buried. Her headstone was simple granite, engraved with her name, dates, and a quote she'd chosen herself. Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. I sat cross-legged on the grass beside her grave, the way I used to sit in her art studio while she painted. "I found your note, Mom," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. "The one about Liam and me being equally precious. I wish you were here to explain it to Dad." The wind rustled through the maple trees that shaded the cemetery, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice, encouraging me to be brave, to stand up for what I believed was right. "I don't know what to do," I continued. "If I fight this, I'll hurt Liam. If I don't fight it, I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror again." A robin landed near Mom's headstone, cocked its head at me, then flew away toward the lake. Mom had always said robins were symbols of renewal, of spring returning after the hardest winter. Maybe that's what this was, not an ending, but the possibility of a new beginning. I drove back to the lake house slowly, taking the scenic route that wound past farms and covered bridges, past the elementary school where Mom had taught art classes, past the historical society where Dad had served on the board for 20 years. This was the community that had shaped our family, the place where the Langford legacy had been built, generation by generation. But legacy, I was beginning to understand, wasn't just about what you inherited. It was about what you chose to do with what you'd been given. When I arrived home, I found Dad in the garden behind the house, working among Mom's flower beds. He'd maintained them meticulously since her death, keeping alive the perennials she'd planted, adding new varieties she would have loved. "The peonies are late this year," he said without looking up. "Your mother always said they were worth waiting for. She was right about a lot of things." Dad glanced at me, noting something in my tone. "How was your meeting with Grace?" Illuminating. I imagine it was. We stood there among Mom's flowers, two people who loved the same woman but had somehow lost the ability to love each other the way she would have wanted. "Dad, we need to talk." I thought we were talking. Really talk. About Mom. About the will. About what kind of family we want to be. Dad set down his trowel and looked at me directly. "What kind of family do you want us to be, Nina?" "The kind Mom would recognize." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He dusted off his hands and gestured toward the porch. "All right," he said. "Let's talk." As we walked toward the house, I felt the weight of Mom's note in my pocket, her words about equal love and equal legacy. The conversation ahead would determine whether our family could find its way back to the vision she'd held for us, or whether we were destined to remain fractured by pride and misunderstanding. But for the first time since I'd arrived in Vermont, I felt something that might have been hope. The conversation I'd been building up to for 3 days lasted exactly 17 minutes. We sat on the porch where I'd sketched the lake view, where Dad had almost admitted his regrets, where the ghost of our better relationship seemed most present. I pulled out Mom's note with the careful ceremony of someone presenting evidence in court. "Grace Turner gave me this," I said. It was attached to Mom's will. Dad took the paper with hands that shook slightly. Whether from age, medication, or emotion, I couldn't tell. He read it slowly, his lips moving silently over Mom's familiar words about equal love and equal legacy. When he finished, he folded the note carefully and handed it back to me. "Your mother was an idealist," he said. That was it. That was his entire response to his late wife's explicit wish that her children be treated equally. "She was also your wife," I said. Doesn't that matter? Of course it matters. But Martha didn't understand the practical realities of estate planning. She didn't think about tax implications or property management or long-term financial stability. She thought about love. She thought about fairness. Fairness isn't always practical, Nina. I stared at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to appreciate history and literature and the importance of preserving beautiful things, who had somehow convinced himself that love could be quantified, that family could be managed like a business portfolio. You know what the really sad part is? I said. Mom's note isn't about money. It's about recognition. She wanted us both to know we were equally precious to her. But you can't even see that, can you? Dad's jaw tightened. I see it. I also see that your mother never had to make the hard decisions that come with actually managing an estate. She never had to worry about what would happen to this house, to this family's history, if it fell into the wrong hands. The wrong hands. I'm your daughter, not a stranger. You're my daughter who lives in New York, who has never shown any interest in preserving family traditions, who would probably sell this place to the first developer who made a decent offer. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I had no plans to move back to Vermont. I wouldn't want the responsibility of maintaining a house this size. But that wasn't the point, and Dad knew it. So you're protecting the house from me. I'm protecting it for future generations. Liam's future generations, not mine. Do you plan to have children, Nina? Do you plan to raise them with an understanding of their family history, their connection to this place? The question hit like a physical blow. At 27, I was still figuring out my career, my relationships, my basic adult responsibilities. The idea of children felt abstract, someday distant. But the implication that my hypothetical reproductive choices should determine my place in the family hierarchy was breathtaking in its cruelty. I don't know, I said honestly. But that's not really the point, is it? Isn't it? This house has been in our family for 4 generations. The responsibility that comes with it. The responsibility should be shared equally between your children, the way Mom wanted. Dad stood up, pacing to the porch railing. Your mother wanted a lot of things that weren't realistic. She wanted you to pursue art without worrying about financial security. She wanted me to support your choices without considering their long-term consequences. She wanted this family to operate on pure emotion instead of practical planning. She wanted us to love each other. We do love each other. But love doesn't solve everything, Nina. It doesn't pay bills or maintain property or ensure that family legacies survive into the next generation. I looked at this man who had shaped my childhood, who had read me bedtime stories and helped with homework, and attended every school play despite his obvious discomfort with public displays of emotion, who was now calmly explaining why his love for me had conditions and fine print. You know what I think? I said. I think you're scared. Of what? Of admitting that you made a mistake. Of acknowledging that maybe Mom understood something about family that you never learned. Dad's expression hardened. Your mother is gone, Nina. I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of these decisions. We're all living with the consequences. The difference is, Liam doesn't know it yet. That stopped him. For the first time in our conversation, Dad looked genuinely uncertain. You haven't told him? What am I supposed to say? Hey, brother, Dad's leaving you everything because he thinks I'm irresponsible and you're the golden child? That's exactly what this is. You can dress it up in language about practical estate planning and family traditions, but at the end of the day, you've decided Liam is worthy of the family legacy, and I'm not. Dad returned to his chair, suddenly looking older than his 63 years. It's not about worth, Nina. It's about fit. Liam fits here. You never did. The honesty was almost refreshing. After years of polite distance and unspoken disappointments, we were finally naming the thing that had poisoned our relationship. You're right, I said. I never fit. but that doesn't mean I never belonged. There's a difference? All the difference in the world. Fitting means changing yourself to match other people's expectations. Belonging means being accepted for who you are. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake where a great blue heron was fishing in the shallows. I don't know how to do that, he said finally. Accept you for who you are. Your choices, your lifestyle, your priorities. They're so foreign to me. It's like we speak different languages. Then maybe it's time to learn a new language. At my age, Dad, you're 63, not 93. You've got plenty of time to figure out how to love your daughter without trying to change her. He turned to look at me directly. Is that what you think I've been doing? Trying to change you? Haven't you? I've been trying to protect you from making choices that would make your life harder than it needs to be. By excluding me from the family? By freeing you from obligations that would tie you to a life you don't want. We were back to his patronizing version of liberation, the idea that disinheritance was actually a gift. But now I could hear something else in his voice. Genuine confusion, as if he truly couldn't understand why I might want to be tied to this family, this place, this legacy. Dad, what if I want those obligations? Do you? The question forced me to examine my own motivations. Did I want to be responsible for maintaining this house, for preserving family traditions, for carrying forward the Langford legacy? Or was I just fighting for the principle of being included? I want the choice, I said. I want to be seen as someone worthy of having that choice. Even if you'd choose differently than Liam would? Especially then. The family legacy should be big enough to include different approaches, different perspectives. Mom understood that. Dad picked up the note I'd left on the table between us, reading it again. Your mother also thought love conquered all. She never had to make a decision that required choosing between love and practicality. Maybe because she understood they don't have to be opposites. Before Dad could respond, we heard a car in the driveway. Liam's voice carried from the front of the house. Dad? Nina? You guys out back? We looked at each other with the guilty expressions of people who'd been caught discussing secrets. In a few seconds, Liam would join us on the porch, bringing his enthusiasm about the house he was planning to buy with Dad's help, his excitement about the future he was building with Dad's blessing. We should tell him, I said quietly. Tell him what? About the will. About this conversation. About the fact that his inheritance is funded by my exclusion. Dad's face went pale. Nina, please. Not like this. Then how? When? After you're gone. And he finds out from Grace Turner? I'll tell him when the time is right. When will that be? When he's signed the mortgage papers for his new house? When he's planned his whole future around money that came from disinheriting his sister? Liam appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a bottle of champagne and grinning like someone who'd won the lottery. There you are. I brought the good stuff to celebrate Dad's generosity. He set the champagne on the porch table and looked between us. Everything okay? You both look serious. I met Dad's eyes, giving him one last chance to control the narrative. He said nothing. Actually, Liam, there's something you should know. I began. Nina. Dad's voice carried a warning. Something about what? Liam asked, his smile fading. The moment stretched between us, loaded with the weight of everything that was about to change. I could tell Liam the truth and watch his joy crumble. I could stay silent and let him live in ignorance. Or I could find some middle ground that honored both his happiness and my need for honesty. About the house hunting, I said finally. I think it's great that you're staying close to family. Dad needs someone nearby who cares about this place the way you do. Liam's relief was visible. Thanks, Nina. That means a lot coming from you. I know you and Dad don't always see eye to eye, but family is family, right? Right, I said, the word tasting like ashes. Dad shot me a look that might have been gratitude or might have been warning. Liam popped the champagne cork, and we sat on the porch drinking sparkling wine and discussing his house plans, while the real conversation, the one about wills and inheritance and the price of family belonging, lurked beneath every word. But as I watched Liam's excitement, listened to his plans for Sunday dinners and holiday traditions, and the grandchildren he hoped to give Dad someday, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me and Dad anymore. This was about what kind of family we wanted to be, what kind of legacy we wanted to leave, what kind of love we wanted to model for future generations. And that conversation would require more than legal documents or emotional confrontations. It would require the kind of courage that Mom had shown in her note. The courage to believe that love and fairness didn't have to be mutually exclusive, that family could be both practical and generous, that legacy was about more than property and traditions. It would require us to be worthy of the love she'd left behind. After Liam went home, Dad and I sat in silence on the porch as the sun set over the lake. The champagne had been consumed, the celebration acknowledged, the surface pleasantries maintained. But underneath, everything had changed. "Thank you," Dad said finally, for letting him have his moment. "I didn't do it for you. I know." "This isn't over, Dad. The conversation, the will, any of it. I know that too." A loon called from across the lake, its haunting cry echoing off the water. Mom used to say loons mated for life, that they were symbols of devotion and fidelity, but they were also wild creatures who couldn't be tamed or owned, who had to be loved on their own terms. Maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn, not how to fit into Dad's version of family, but how to be myself within it. And maybe the lesson Dad needed to learn was that love worth having was love without conditions, love that didn't require anyone to be smaller or different or more convenient than they actually were. The question was whether we were both brave enough to learn those lessons before it was too late. "I'm going to stay another week," I said. Dad nodded. "Your room will be ready." It wasn't an invitation exactly, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was something in between. An acknowledgement that some conversations required time, that some families needed more than one chance to get things right. As I headed inside, I heard Dad's voice behind me. "Nina?" I turned back. "Your mother would be proud of you, the person you've become, the choices you've made. I want you to know that." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Thomas Langford. It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad, if you gave her a reason to be." I left him sitting on the porch in the gathering darkness, staring out at the lake that had witnessed 4 generations of Langford family dramas. Tomorrow I would have to decide what came next, whether to fight the will, accept the disinheritance, or find some third option that honored both Mom's vision of equal love and Dad's need for practical legacy planning. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in Mom's old art room and remember what it felt like to believe that love could conquer all, that family meant forever, that belonging was a birthright, rather than something you had to earn through acceptable choices and convenient conformity. Some lessons, I was learning, had to be remembered before they could be lived. I found Mom's journals 3 days later, while Dad was at his weekly appointment with the cardiologist. I hadn't been looking for them. I'd been searching Mom's old art room for her watercolor brushes, thinking I might try painting the lake view that had always captivated us both. The journals were hidden behind a loose board in the built-in bookshelf, wrapped in one of Mom's silk scarves. 12 leather-bound notebooks spanning the years from my birth until just weeks before her death. The early entries documented my childhood through Mom's loving eyes, my first steps, artistic attempts, stubborn independence, but also her growing awareness of the tension between Dad's expectations and my nature. June 3rd, 1998. Thomas is concerned about Nina's lack of interest in traditional activities. I told him she's perfectly feminine as she is. Creativity doesn't recognize gender boundaries. But I can see him watching her, measuring her against some internal standard I don't understand. The entries from 2010, the year before Mom's death, stopped me cold. February 28th, 2010. Thomas showed me his new will today. He's left everything to Liam, with just a small trust fund for Nina. I tried to explain that this wasn't generosity. It was rejection disguised as protection. But he's convinced himself that he's doing Nina a favor. My heart pounded as I continued reading. March 15th, 2010. I need to talk to Grace Turner about my own will. If something happens to me, I want both children to know they were equally precious, equally deserving of whatever I can leave behind. The final entries were the most painful. May 20th, 2010. Nina told me about her scholarship to art school. She's scared to tell her father. I can see the wall building between them, his disapproval and her defensiveness feeding off each other. If something happens to me, who will bridge this gap? I need to write letters to both of them. Tucked inside the back cover of the last journal, I found 2 sealed envelopes, one addressed to Dad, one to me. I opened mine with trembling fingers. My dearest Nina, your father loves you more than he knows how to express. His disapproval isn't about you. It's about his own fears, his inability to imagine a world different from the one he was raised in. I know your father has made decisions about his will that exclude you, but love isn't about making decisions for other people. It's about trusting them to make their own decisions. Don't let his fear turn you away from this family entirely. Fight for your place here, not because you need his approval, but because this family needs you. All my love. Mom, P.S. I've written a letter for your father, too. When the time feels right, please make sure he gets it. I called Carmen immediately. Holy shit, Nina. Her voice was fierce with indignation after I sent her a photo of the letter. Your mom basically wrote you a permission slip to fight for your family. I know. But there's a letter for Dad, too. Should I read it first? Nina, you're not going into battle. You're trying to save your family. I called Grace Turner next. If I were to provide evidence that my father's will contradicts my mother's explicit wishes, would that constitute grounds for challenging his decisions? What kind of evidence? Letters. Clear statements about equal treatment for both children. Grace was quiet. Nina, before you think about legal challenges, consider what your mother would have wanted. Did she write those letters to give you weapons against your father? Or tools for reconciliation? When Dad came home, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with Mom's journals spread out before me. What's all this? He asked, setting down his keys. Mom's journals. I found them in her art room. Dad's face went pale. Nina, those are private. They were private. Now they're necessary. I held up the letter addressed to him. She wrote this for you. I think you should read it. Dad sat down, across from me, his movements careful. What did she say? In your letter? She said you love me more than you know how to express. She said your disapproval isn't about me. It's about your own fears. She said I belong in this family whether you can see it or not. Dad opened his letter slowly, and I watched his face change as he read. I saw surprise, then pain, then recognition. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes bright with unshed tears. She knew, he said simply. About the will, about my fears, about the way I've been pushing you away. What else did she say? Dad read aloud. Thomas, our daughter doesn't need to be fixed or freed or managed. She needs to be loved. And love isn't about making people fit your expectations. It's about expanding your expectations to fit the people you love. The silence felt sacred. She also said, Dad continued, his voice barely above a whisper, that if I lost you, I'd lose the part of her that lived on in your creativity, your independence. She said losing you would be like losing her all over again. I reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to lose me, Dad. But you do have to see me. I'm trying, Nina. But I don't know how to bridge the gap between who you are and who I thought you should be. Maybe you don't need to bridge it. Maybe you just need to accept that the gap exists and love me anyway. Dad squeezed my hand. The will, he said finally. I need to think about the will. I need you to do more than think about it, Dad. I need you to change it. Even if it means sharing responsibility for all of this. He gestured around the kitchen, meaning the house, the legacy, everything. Especially then, I said. I want the choice. I want to be trusted with the choice. Dad nodded slowly. Your mother would have wanted that too. She did want that. She wrote it down. For the first time in 10 years, my father smiled at me with something that looked like pride. You're more like her than I ever realized, he said. Stubborn as hell, but stubborn for the right reasons. As the sun set over the lake, Dad and I sat reading Mom's journals together, rediscovering the woman who had loved us both enough to leave behind a roadmap for finding our way back to each other. The will could be changed. The family could be healed. But first, we had to be brave enough to honor the love that had been there all along. The appointment with Grace Turner was scheduled for Thursday morning. Dad had called her the day after we read Mom's letters together, his voice steady but determined as he explained that he needed to revise his will once more, this time to honor his wife's wishes rather than his own fears. But first, we had to tell Liam. I suggested we do it at the lakehouse, in the familiar comfort of the kitchen. Dad wanted neutral ground at Murphy's Tavern. In the end, we compromised. Sunday dinner at home, with the understanding that this conversation would happen before dessert. The 3 days between Mom's letters and Liam's arrival felt like preparation for battle. Dad moved through the house with careful deliberation, rehearsing difficult words. I found myself sketching obsessively. The lake, the house, family portraits from memory. Carmen called twice daily for updates. How's he handling it? She asked. Wednesday night. Better than I expected. He seems relieved, actually. Like he's been carrying guilt for years and finally has permission to set it down. And you? I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to change his mind, or find some new reason why I don't deserve equal treatment. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Dad made his famous blueberry pancakes while I set the table with Mom's good china, the set she'd only used for special occasions. Liam arrived at noon, carrying flowers and expensive wine. His girlfriend Sarah was with him, a petite brunette with kind eyes and an easy laugh. I hope you don't mind that I brought Sarah, Liam said. I thought it was time she got to know the family better. I exchanged glances with Dad. We'd planned this conversation for 3 people, not 4. The conversation through lunch was pleasant, nostalgic, carefully avoiding deeper waters. Sarah asked about my art career, genuinely impressed by my children's book illustrations. Dad told stories about the house's history, local wildlife, renovations he and Mom had undertaken. It felt like the family gathering we'd never quite managed when I was growing up. Relaxed, harmonious, genuinely enjoyable. Which made what we were about to do feel cruel. After lunch, Dad suggested we move to the living room for coffee. When we were settled, Liam turned to us with obvious excitement. I'm so glad we're all together, like this. It feels like old times, but better, more complete somehow. The irony was almost unbearable. Liam, Dad began, his voice carefully controlled. There's something your sister and I need to discuss with you. Sure. What's up? Dad took a deep breath. It's about my will, son. About some decisions I've made that affect both you and Nina. Your will? Liam's smile faded. Dad, you're healthy. Why are we talking about wills? Because I made some choices that weren't fair to your sister. Choices I need to correct. I watched understanding dawn on Liam's face. "What kind of choices?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked between us, sensing the shift in mood. "Should I go for a walk?" "No," Liam said, not taking his eyes off Dad. "If this affects our future, Sarah should hear it too." Dad spoke with careful precision. "My current will leaves everything to you, Liam. The house, the investments, your mother's jewelry, all of it. Nina receives nothing." The silence felt endless. "Nothing?" Liam finally asked. "Nothing. But why?" "Because I convinced myself that Nina didn't want these responsibilities, that she'd be happier free from family obligations. Because I was proud and stubborn and scared." Liam turned to me. "You knew about this?" "I found out a week ago." "And you didn't tell me?" "I tried to, several times. But I'd see how happy you were about the house, about Dad helping with your down payment, and I couldn't destroy that." "The down payment." Liam's voice was flat. "That's coming from Nina's inheritance, isn't it?" "Yes," Dad said quietly. Sarah made a small sound of distress. Liam stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Jesus, Dad, how could you do this to her? How could you do this to us?" "I thought I was protecting everyone." "That wasn't your choice to make. We're siblings. We're supposed to inherit equally." Dad's face crumpled slightly. "Your mother did want equal treatment. She wrote letters before she died, making that very clear. I pulled out copies of Mom's notes, handing them to Liam. He read them quickly, his expression growing darker. "She knew," he said. "Mom knew you were planning to disinherit Nina, and she wrote these letters to try to stop you." "Yes. And you ignored them. For 10 years you ignored your wife's dying wishes." "I thought I knew better. I thought love meant making hard choices, protecting people from mistakes." "Nina's not a mistake, Dad. Her choices aren't mistakes." Liam handed the letters to Sarah, who read them with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, to me. "I can't imagine how this must feel." "It feels like being erased," I said honestly. "Like spending your whole life being measured against impossible standards and finally being told you failed." Liam returned to stand behind Sarah, hands on her shoulders. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Are you going to change the will?" "Yes. I'm meeting with Grace Turner this week. Nina will inherit equally with you. 50-50, the way your mother wanted." "Good. That's the way it should be." "Even if it means less for you, less help with the house." "Dad, do you hear yourself? You're asking if I want to profit from my sister's disinheritance. What kind of person do you think I am?" Sarah squeezed Liam's hand. "We'll figure out the house situation. There are other ways." "But you had plans," I said. "Dreams about staying close to family." "Those plans included you, Nina. They've always included you, even if Dad's will didn't." The simple generosity of his response broke something open in my chest. "I don't want to take anything away from you," I said. "You're not taking anything away. You're taking back what was always yours." Dad had been silent, watching his children navigate the crisis he'd created with more grace than he'd shown in a decade. "I owe you both an apology," he said finally. "Not just for the will, but for years of letting fear make my decisions." "We all make mistakes," Liam said gently. "The important thing is that you're fixing this one. Is it fixable?" Dad looked at me directly. "Nina, is this something we can come back from?" I thought about Mom's letters, about her faith that love could overcome fear. "I think so," I said. "But it's going to take time. And it's going to take you trusting me with choices instead of making them for me." "I can do that." "Can you? Really? Even if I make choices you don't understand?" Dad considered seriously. "I don't know, but I want to learn how." Your mother thought I could. Sarah spoke up quietly. Could I say something? I grew up in a family where love had conditions. It's exhausting, but I've seen what unconditional love looks like through Liam. And I think what you're all trying to do here, your mom would be really proud. She would be, Dad agreed. Stubborn and impatient with how long it took us, but proud. We sat as the afternoon light faded. 4 people who'd stumbled into the kind of honest conversation most families spend decades avoiding. As Sarah and Liam prepared to leave, my brother pulled me aside. Are you okay? Really okay? I think so. Are you? It changes things back to how they should have been all along. He hugged me tightly. Nina, whatever Dad's will said, you were never erased from this family. Not for me. You're my sister, and that's not something any legal document can change. After they left, Dad and I cleaned dishes in comfortable silence. Thursday morning, Dad said, 10 o'clock with Grace. Will you come with me? To witness the signing, to make sure I get it right this time. I looked at this man who had shaped my childhood, disappointed me deeply, and was now trying to make amends. Yes, I said. I'll be there. That night, I thought about Mom's watercolor brushes, still waiting in their blue wooden box. Tomorrow, I would paint the lake view that had captivated me since childhood. But this time, I would paint it as it truly was. Not a perfect postcard, scene, but a real place where real people had struggled and loved and hurt each other, and somehow found their way back to grace. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes Vermont famous. Blue skies, crisp air, the lake reflecting everything perfectly like nature's own mirror. Dad and I drove to Grace Turner's office in comfortable silence, both of us carrying the weight of this moment that would legally reshape our family's future. But as we turned onto Main Street, Dad suddenly pulled over and parked in front of the coffee shop where Mom used to take me for hot chocolate. I need to say something before we go in there, he said, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Something I should have said years ago. I waited, watching his face in profile as he stared out at the street where he'd lived his entire adult life. When your mother died, I felt like I was drowning, he began. Not just in grief, but in the sudden responsibility of raising 2 children, alone, of making all the decisions that we used to make together. You were 17, about to graduate, and so angry, at me, at the world, at the unfairness of losing her when you needed her most. He turned to look at me directly. I didn't know how to help you through that grief because I was barely surviving my own, and when you chose art school, when you chose New York, when you chose a life so different from what I understood, it felt like I was losing you too. Dad, let me finish, please. His voice was thick with emotion. I convinced myself that pushing you away was protecting both of us from more disappointment. If I expected nothing, I couldn't be hurt when you didn't come home for holidays or call as often as Liam did. If I wrote you out of the will, I couldn't feel guilty about leaving you responsibilities you might not want. He was crying now, tears he'd been holding back for 10 years. But your mother's letters. They made me realize that I wasn't protecting either of us. I was just choosing fear over love, and in doing that, I was failing the most important promise I ever made, to honor the family she wanted us to be. I reached across the car and took his hand. Mom's letters didn't just tell you to change the will, did they? They told you to change how you see me. She said you were exactly the daughter she'd hoped for. Creative, independent, brave enough to forge your own path even when it disappointed people you loved. She said the problem wasn't that you were different. It was that I was too scared to celebrate those differences. We sat in the car, father and daughter, finally having the conversation we should have had the day after Mom's funeral. Cars passed by. People went about their morning routines. But inside our small space, time felt suspended. "I'm scared, Nina," Dad admitted. "Scared that it's too late, that I've damaged our relationship beyond repair. Scared that changing the will is just a legal gesture that can't fix the emotional distance between us." "Are you scared that I'll disappoint you?" "No. I'm scared that I'll keep disappointing you." The honesty of it broke my heart. This man who had seemed so certain, so judgmental, so unshakable in his disapproval. He was just a father who had lost his way after losing his wife, who had chosen control over connection because connection felt too dangerous. "Dad, you can't disappoint me any more than you already have," I said, and saw him flinch. "But that's not because you're terrible. It's because I've finally stopped expecting you to be perfect. I've stopped needing your approval to know my own worth." Is that good or bad? It's honest. And it means we can start over if you want to. Not as perfect father and perfect daughter, but as two imperfect people who love each other despite our flaws. Dad squeezed my hand. "I'd like that." "Then, let's go change your will. And after that, let's figure out how to change everything else." Grace Turner was waiting for us with coffee and the kind of warm professionalism that had made her successful in a small town for 20 years. The new will was already prepared, printed on legal letterhead, official and imposing. "I've made the some changes we discussed," she said, settling behind her desk. "Equal inheritance for both children, with provisions for shared decision-making about the family property. Nina, you'll have the same rights and responsibilities as Liam regarding the lakehouse and all other assets." She walked us through each section, explaining the legal language, the tax implications, the practical realities of joint ownership. But what struck me most was how different this document felt from the hidden will I'd discovered in Dad's study. This wasn't about exclusion or punishment or misguided protection. This was about inclusion, about trust, about believing that both children were worthy of the family legacy. "There's one addition I'd like to make," Dad said, as Grace prepared the signature pages. "Something that wasn't in our original discussion." Grace looked up, pen poised. "What kind of addition?" "I want to establish an art education fund in my wife's name. Something that will provide scholarships for young artists, especially those from families who might not otherwise support creative careers." I stared at him. "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to. Your mother gave up her own artistic dreams to raise our family. The least I can do is help other young women avoid having to make that choice." "The fund could be administered jointly by both children," Grace suggested. "Nina's expertise in the arts, Liam's financial background. It could be a meaningful way to honor your wife's memory while bringing the family together around a shared purpose." Dad looked at me. "What do you think?" What I thought was that this man continued to surprise me, that perhaps the capacity for growth didn't diminish with age, that maybe it was never too late to become the person your loved ones hoped you could be. "I think Mom would love it," I said. The signing ceremony was brief, but significant. Dad's signature, bold and decisive. My signature as witness, making it legally binding. Grace's notarization, making it official. 3 signatures that transformed our family's legal structure, and more importantly, its emotional foundation. As we prepared to leave, Grace handed me a sealed envelope. "This is from your mother," she said. "She gave it to me the last time she was in this office, with instructions to give it to you if and when your father changed his will to include you equally." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Mom's handwriting. "Nina, if you're reading this, it means your father found the courage to honor both his love for you and his love for me. It means he chose connection over control, trust over fear. I knew he would, eventually. He just needed time to remember who he was before grief made him forget. Love him for the man he's trying to become, not just the man he's been." And remember that the greatest inheritance I can leave you isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that you are worthy of love simply because you exist, not because you've earned it through acceptable choices. Paint beautiful things. Live beautifully. Love boldly. Your father will learn to celebrate these choices. I promise. Mom. I showed the letter to Dad, watching his face as he read Mom's final vote of confidence in his capacity for change. She always believed in me more than I believed in myself, he said quietly. She believed in both of us. We drove home along the lake road, the same route I'd taken from the train station just 2 weeks earlier. But everything looked different. Now, brighter, more welcoming, more like home. The will in my purse wasn't just a legal document. It was proof that families could change, that love could overcome fear, that it was never too late to choose connection over self-protection. When we arrived at the house, Liam's car was already in the driveway. He and Sarah were sitting on the porch, obviously waiting for us. "How did it go?" Liam asked as we approached. "It's done," Dad said simply. "You're both equal inheritors now, the way your mother wanted." Sarah clapped her hands together. "That's wonderful. There's more," I said, and told them about the art education fund, about Mom's final letter, about the scholarship program that would honor her memory while supporting young artists. "She would be so proud," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of all of us, but especially of you, Dad, for having the courage to change." We spent the afternoon on the porch, the 4 of us, talking about practical matters: how to manage joint ownership of the property, how to structure the scholarship fund, how to navigate the new dynamics of shared family responsibility. But underneath the logistics, something more important was happening. We were becoming a family again, one that included everyone, instead of excluding the members who didn't fit predetermined molds. As the sun began to set over the lake, I excused myself and went up to Mom's art room. I found her watercolor brushes in their blue wooden box, her good paper in the flat file by the window, her paint still viable after all these years of storage. I set up her easel by the window and began to paint the lake view that had captivated me since childhood. But this time, I didn't try to make it perfect or traditional or acceptable to anyone else's aesthetic standards. I painted it the way I saw it, wild and beautiful and constantly changing, full of hidden depths and surprising moments of grace. I worked. I heard voices from the porch below, Dad and Liam discussing plans for the house, Sarah asking questions about family history, the easy conversation of people who belong together. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged too. Not because I'd changed to fit their expectations, but because they'd expanded their definition of family to include all the ways love could manifest. The painting took shape slowly, layers of color building into something that captured not just the physical beauty of the lake, but the emotional landscape of coming home. When I finally stepped back to assess my work, I realized I'd painted more than a view. I'd painted a promise that beautiful things were worth preserving, that families were worth fighting for, that love was worth the risk of disappointment. Was still admiring the painting when Dad appeared in the doorway. "It's beautiful," he said, studying the canvas. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so. I know so." He moved closer, examining the brushstrokes with the careful attention he usually reserved for historical documents. "Nina, I need to ask you something." "What? Are you planning to move back? Now that you're inheriting equally, now that this is your home too?" I considered the question, looking around the art room where Mom had found solace, where I'd discovered her hidden truths, where I'd finally understood that belonging wasn't about geography. It was about acceptance. "I don't know," I said honestly. "My life is in New York. My work, my friends, my future. It's all there. But this is home too now. Not because of the will, but because it's a place where I'm loved for who I am instead of who I'm supposed to be." Dad nodded, understanding. Your mother used to say home wasn't a place. It was a feeling. The feeling of being known and accepted and valued. She was right. She usually was. We stood together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, watching the last light fade over the lake that had witnessed 4 generations of Langford family drama and love and loss, and finally, healing. The will was changed. The family was restored. But the real victory wasn't legal or financial. It was emotional. It was the knowledge that love could overcome fear, that families could learn and grow and choose connection over control, that it was never too late to honor the best parts of the people we'd lost by becoming better versions of ourselves. Tomorrow, I would return to New York, but I'd be leaving as someone different than the woman who'd arrived 2 weeks earlier. I'd be leaving as someone who belonged, someone whose voice mattered, someone worthy of love and legacy, and all the complicated blessings that came with being part of a family that had finally learned how to love without conditions. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where this story began, on the porch of the lakehouse, sketching the view that had shaped my childhood. But everything was different now. The drawing in my hands captured not just the physical beauty of Lake Champlain, but the emotional landscape of a family that had learned to love without conditions. Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, a morning ritual we'd established during my monthly visits home. Yes, home. Because that's what this place had become again. Not a museum of past disappointments, but a living space where all versions of the Langford family were welcome. The scholarship committee meets next week, he said, settling into the chair beside me. We have 12 applicants this year. The Martha Langford Art Education Fund had awarded its first scholarships in the spring. 3 young women whose families had initially opposed their artistic pursuits. Watching them receive their awards, seeing their parents' faces transform, from skepticism to pride, had been one of the most satisfying moments of my adult life. Mom would be thrilled, I said, adding shading to the dock where a great blue heron was fishing. She'd be thrilled about all of it. The fund, the family dinners, the way Liam lights up when he talks about his wedding plans. Liam and Sarah's engagement had been officially announced at Christmas, with a wedding planned for next fall. They'd bought their house, a smaller one than originally intended, but perfect for their needs. More importantly, they'd made it clear that family decisions would be made by the family, not dictated by inheritance structures or patriarchal assumptions. And she'd be proud of your gallery show, Dad continued. My first solo exhibition had opened in Brooklyn 2 months earlier, a series of paintings exploring the concept of home, family, and belonging. The centerpiece was the lake view I'd painted in Mom's art room, the one that captured not just scenery, but the emotional journey of finding my place in the family legacy. I never thought I'd see the day when Thomas Langford would attend an art gallery opening, I said, smiling at the memory of Dad in his best suit, awkwardly but earnestly discussing my work with strangers. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd understand what your mother meant about art, washing away the dust of everyday life. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning light shift across the water. This view had remained constant through 4 generations of Langford family drama. But my relationship to it had transformed completely. It no longer represented everything I was trying to escape from. Now it symbolized everything I'd fought to reclaim. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. Safe travels. Can't wait to hear about the latest family developments. I was heading back to New York that afternoon, back to my studio apartment and my freelance deadlines and my complicated city life. But I was also coming back next month for Liam's birthday, and the month after that for the scholarship ceremony, and regularly after that, because this was my family and this was my home, and I no longer had to choose between the life I'd built and the legacy I'd inherited. Ready for the drive? Dad asked. Almost. I finished the sketch and held it up, the lake house and its surroundings, drawn with the confidence of someone who belonged there. One more for the collection. As I packed my art supplies, I thought about the woman who'd arrived here 6 months ago, angry and hurt and convinced that family love came with impossible conditions. That woman couldn't have imagined this morning. This easy conversation, this sense of belonging, this knowledge that she was valued not despite her differences but because of them. The will had been changed. The family had been healed. But the real inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the understanding that love, real love, expands to include whoever we truly are, not whoever we think we're supposed to be. As I drove away from the lake house, I caught sight of Dad in my rearview mirror, waving from the porch where Mom's flowers bloomed in careful abundance, where 4 generations of Langfords had wrestled with questions of legacy and belonging, where one stubborn daughter had finally learned that home isn't a place you inherit. It's a feeling you create, one honest conversation at a time. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.